I've been a professional photographer since I was 18 years old, and I'm 55. And the jazz stuff has always been, it's what brought me to photography. It's what made me interested in photography, and it's what I've come back to in the last 15 years. And so to be asked by this group of people who are jazz journalists and people involved in the industry of jazz is it's an honor to me. So I'm really, really, really moved by it. And I wanted to start by kind of telling a story a little bit, and that Eddie Henderson picture that starts it is a good place to start. But I grew up on 10th Street and 3rd Avenue in New York, and my dad was in and around jazz my whole life. And we lived really close to Bradley's. So as I got to be a teenager, if I couldn't find my dad, I'd call Bradley's, and they'd say, "Oh, no, no, no. He was here for the first set, but Flanagan's at the Vanguard." So I'd call the Vanguard, and they say, "Oh, yeah, he just left. He just went over to SOB's," right? I would just kind of hunt the jazz clubs to kind of find him growing up. And when I was 14 years old, all I wanted for my bar mitzvah at 13, it took me till I was 14 to get it, was a camera. And I got a Pentax K1000, and I went to Bradley's and to see a guy named Tommy Flanagan, who's a good friend of my dad's. And there was a guy sitting there at the table with us, who was Eddie Henderson. And Eddie was trained, a lot of people may know this already, but Eddie was trained as a psychiatrist. And he was a psychiatrist at SF General. And then, after many years of doing that, he would take off for a month or two and go play music. He finally quit and started to play music full time. And that was right when I met him. And nobody in my family, good Jewish family, I was supposed to be a dentist or a doctor or an accountant. I wasn't supposed to be a photographer. Going to art school was not something they wanted me to do. And Eddie told me, he said, "Listen, don't ever let anybody tell you to do something that you're not sure you want to do, because if you think that you should do it, you want to be a photographer, you should be a photographer." Well, fast forward to 2017, and I was at the San Jose Jazz Festival, and because I'm hired by the festival, I always want the musicians to know that I'm going to be there and shooting. I always try and talk to them beforehand, let them know who I am, where I'm going to be, and if there's any place that they don't want me. So, like, Theo Croker did not want to see me; it would distract him, So I was telling Eddie who I was, and then I said, I got a funny story to tell you. And I told him that story, and he said, "I don't remember that, but man, it's full circle, isn't it?" Because that was in 1981, and here we were in 2017. And so this particular image, although maybe it's not the best image I ever took, it's got something really personal to me. And to that point, and you can just start moving through her, we can go slowly. But when I photographed jazz, and this is a photograph of Wayne Henderson from the Jazz Passengers, I always prefer the musicians to know that I'm there. And they may not know it, but I think of myself as part of the band, because as a jazz musician, you have to improvise. And in order to be successful, in order to do it well, you need to be constantly paying attention. And I feel the same way as a photographer. If I'm not paying attention, I'm going to miss the moment. And you can keep going, Harar, as you go. So I often think of myself as part of the band. And I like to, when I can, and again, because a lot of times I'm hired by the festivals or the musicians, I'm allowed to have access that others won't. So I will often look and figure out where I want to be, rather than just in front of the stage. And as you can see here, because I can kind of get into the eaves of the stage and off to the side, I try and find places that are a little more interesting. Also, Wayne Henderson, who died not long after that. And I'm blanking on this young guy's name. He's out of New Orleans. But this is another good example, I think, of one of the things that I look for are those moments. And I'm looking for, Jay Mizell, the photographer, talks about gesture and how everything has gesture, how a building has gesture, how people have gesture, everything has gesture. And I'm looking for those little bits of gesture that make something a little bit different. I'm looking for a very, very particular moment, because it gets frozen in time. And so for a long time, I used to shoot, and still do, on latest and greatest cameras with fast shutter speeds and quick autofocusing lenses. And what I was finding was, and you can keep moving through, that Yeah, I was getting the moment in there, but I was going through 30, 40 images to find that exact moment. And it didn't, it was too much. And that if I actually started to slow down and I started working with vintage lenses, this picture right here was taken with
Sorry,
this lens.
little technical trouble here. One
Oh,
second.
okay, sure. I'll keep talking, but that was taken with,
Yeah.
for the photographers are here, something called the Steinhall Munich 135 from the 1950s, late 1950s. And it's not autofocus, it's manual focus. Everything about this lens is manual, it's old. I have to slow down. I have to look for that moment. I have to be locked in. I have to be paying attention. And I find when I do that, I capture much more of that decisive moment rather than spray and pray and then go through and find the moment. It becomes more authentic because I'm tied into it. And this is a good example of that. It also starts to do really interesting things because, and I'll show this to you later on, one of the things that I'm looking for is I want my image to be timeless. I don't want you to look at this image and be able to say that's 1975, that's 1988. I want you to really be able to hear the music when you see this picture. And of course, go back a second. If you went a little fast, like you're going to see things like this where you're going to see some technology, you're going to see some fashion, you're going to know what year it might be. But I'm always looking for that timeless moment. The other thing here
Well,
is
one
particularly, yeah,
question
go
I
ahead.
have for you, I'm
Yeah,
sorry to interrupt you.
yeah.
You mentioned the vintage lenses, and
Hmm.
are you rigging these lenses in a way to fit a digital camera,
I
or
am.
are you still using film?
Yeah. No, I'm not shooting film at all. Matter of fact, I don't like, I mean, I started out shooting film, obviously. I started, in the early 80s. But I find that the combination of using the old glass with its wonderful imperfections and modern cameras with their ability to shoot in low light, to fire quickly, to
Hmm.
have focusing aids, particularly using a manual focus lens in a dark jazz club can be really difficult. But the
Yeah.
modern cameras have focusing aids that allow me to see in the camera that I'm in focus. So it allows me to use the best in the new and the old.
Okay.
Um, and I
And
actually
it's
find
something you've done yourself, like you've created that.
there's a lot of other people out there doing it. Matter of fact, I don't know if everybody
Okay.
can see, but you can buy small, simple, basic adapters like this. You
Oh,
can
I
buy them
see.
on
Okay.
Amazon for, they're $10, $15 and allow me to
Okay.
take these old lenses and put them on my new cameras.
Okay.
Not all these pictures, like this picture was shot with a modern lens. And
Yeah.
and particularly when I'm hired to shoot a festival, I always the stuff I do on the vintage glass is the backup. That
Hmm.
picture of Robert Glasper is a good example of one of the challenges you have shooting live music, of cables, of mic stands, of
Hmm.
drummers are the hardest. There's always stuff in front of them. So I often try and figure out how I'm going to use the objects on stage to frame what I'm doing.
Hmm.
So I may find a spot and I say, okay, this spot works. And I'm going to keep shooting from this spot till I feel I get that moment that I'm looking for. That's a good example of it.
Hmm.
This is a good example. These are China Moses, Dee Dee Bridgewater's daughter, wonderful singer in her own right. Um, and again, I often look to graphically to how I can use the frame rather than putting things in the center of the frame. Um,
Hmm.
you can keep going. One of the other great things is I often get to photograph musicians multiple times over a period of years. So this is a singer named Jackie Gage, who is based out of New York. I think she's back in San Francisco now. And I've shot her 6 or 7 times, and you'll see in the next few images, these are pictures of Jackie over different periods of time over the years, all live on stage. And as I get to know them and their music, Jackie looks best in those moments in between, in those moments
Is
of
this
contemplation.
is this taken by one of your uh vintage lenses?
This is not, and this was shot in a very, very, very dark club.
Hmm.
And I often will go to black and white. You'll see I don't always use black and white,
Hmm.
but I find that stripping out the color and stripping out the distraction brings me to the essence of the moment. And that's
Okay.
always what every image that I look at is, do I have the moment? And for Jackie, and you can go to the next image, I think it's a great example. It's the moments in between. Here she's listening to the band. For
Mm-hmm.
her, I find those moments in between are the special moments more than when she's singing. Whereas with China, that expression on her face, and that was really, or here, Morris Day. I mean, yeah, that's China. Like that expression makes it. But
Mm-hmm.
for Jackie, it's those quiet moments, and that really ties into her music. But
Mm-hmm.
here the quiet moment isn't as important. And here, this is Morris in 2021, I think. And I think the next image is an image I shot of Morris in 2012. Um,
Ah.
and and this is obviously in color. And when I create my images, whether in black and white or color, whatever treatment I do to them, and I always shoot in color. But whenever I'm working on them in post production, I often do think of it a little bit like jazz too. It's how am I react? I don't have a formula. I don't have a single way that I process every single image. Matter of fact, I process each one of them really differently, and I try and react to how I'm seeing that particular image. And improvise around that. Obviously I have certain techniques that I use, but they change. And then I never ever go back and change them later. Like, because my
Mm-hmm.
style may change or my aesthetic may change. And of course you have the original file, so you could reprocess them a million times. But I often think of it like a jazz recording, right? There's that famous story about Tommy Flanagan and Giant Steps. And if you listen to the original takes on Giant Steps, the piano drops out
Mm-hmm.
because Tommy thought it was a ballad. He handed out the sheet music. He'd never heard it before. He thought he was going to play a ballad. All of a sudden, everybody else starts going, and he was lost. So he stopped for a second, and then he jumped back in. And when you listen to that recording, that's part of what makes it special. And for
Yeah.
me, I think of every image I have as a recording. When I will go back years later and look at older images, but I will never reprocess the same image. Once I've taken it, once I've made it, then it's done, and I move on from it. And it's however I reacted to it in that moment. And even
So
if my
did you
aesthetic
make
has changed.
this faded color in post processing?
Yeah, so yeah, I did. I decided that when I again, I'm always looking for things to be timeless. And part of what I
Mm-hmm.
love about this image is, this soul singer look that he has. It could be of any period, right? And that little bit of motion in his leg that, from the
Mm-hmm.
slower shutter speed, and the arc of it, that just that moment, the arc of his body, the gesture of his body, the crowd behind him a little bit out of focus that you can kind of see in
Yeah, and
the
this.
flare from the light.
Mm-hmm.
It felt of a time, and I wanted to reduce again, simplify it, reduce the amount of color in it, add some tone to it, and then this is where it landed. And I'll know it. It's again, like a musician, when you got it, right? When you hear it, and sometimes you don't. I'll think a lot about my framing and how I use the shapes. I look at everything. I was trained originally for many years as a product photographer, and I shot on large format cameras in which everything was backwards and upside down. And
Mm-hmm.
that reduced everything to shape because you lost the context of like person, piano. So I still like to think that way. And so I will often again look for shapes. And in an image like this, I know that I like the way the piano was framed in that corner. So I set myself up to wait till there was something happening in that moment where that
Mm-hmm.
piano was placed like that. So I'll set the stage for that, and I'll wait. Unfortunately, again, when I get hired to shoot, I often have to shoot. If it's a jazz festival, I might have three sets that start at one, and I can only spend 15 minutes at each one. As much as I like to shoot the whole show, so sometimes I have to do that stuff very quickly.
Do you have
This is
your
all
own
about gesture.
space to sit and take pictures, like a press or?
I so generally when I shoot, again, I want full access. I don't
Mm-hmm.
always get it. Sometimes they'll say you have to stay in this space and you get the first three songs only. But again, generally because I'm invited and I make an effort to explain my process beforehand. No, and I almost never sit still. I try and stay out of the way and don't affect the show, but I'm almost never in the same spot. And I love to shoot from the wings. Sometimes in a theater, I might go up and shoot down with a longer lens. This, again, I'm looking for that moment. I'm looking for that gesture. And to me, that's what makes the images special, is that it's got to be what Cartier-Bresson talked about, is that decisive moment. The moments in between often too, and again, because I'm such a jazz fan, I always go back to thinking about, things jazz musicians have said, right? And Miles once said, it ain't the notes you play, it's the space between the notes. And for me, that often becomes the same with the photographs. And that's when I feel they become the most intimate. This is Paula West.
Do layout artists respect your use of black space, or do they tend to crop close, or where are these getting published? Are these
so they're all a lot of times, a lot of these are shot for the festival, and they'll use them however they want to use them on the website, or I'll shoot for artists. No, they don't always respect it, but it's, you throw things out in the world, and you never know where they're going to land. And for me, the images that I curate for myself, I often don't. I give, if I get hired to do a festival, I give them a lot more than what I select to put into my own work. And they're going to use it how they are. I'm just happy they're inviting me to take pictures and paying me to take pictures of musicians. So if you want to let me do that, and I can use the pictures however I want, go ahead, do whatever you need. I don't want to be precious about it, because there's so few people who get called up and say, fly here and shoot this music festival, that I feel lucky that I get to do that.
Right.
But
Are these showing up on album covers also?
I've shot some album covers. I would love to do more, but almost so much has been done for Monterey Jazz, San Jose Jazz, smaller jazz festivals, Saratoga Jazz Festival. But if you go back, that first image, this is Jose James. If you go back just a second, this is an image in color. It just, to me, I took this down to black and white, and you'll see some others from the same show in black and white. This needed to be in color. It had so much more when it was in color.
Interesting is, at least to my eye, the colored photo looks more vintage than the black and white does.
And that's an example. And these are black and white. You're going to see often here in this presentation I put together for this. I often show you multiple images from the same concert or the same show, because sometimes there's such a difference in mood just from second to second. And when things are locked in, it's almost like when the band's locked in. When I feel locked in, I often walk away with more images than I know what to do with, which is, I feel lucky, but you'll see that. Again, this is the moment between.
This is a very nice homage to Billie Holiday.
Yeah, and it was a concert in homage to Billie Holiday. And but I hope when you look at that picture, you can't tell me that was shot in 2020 or 2021. That you look at that and you say, I don't know when that was shot. You can keep going. There's Dee Dee Bridgewater. It's another good example. Yeah, if you go back to Dee Dee, it's a good example, I think, of gesture, of that moment. I'm not concerned. Here we are, the Jazz Passengers again.
Wilton Felder.
What's that?
Wilton Felder.
Yeah, I thought you said what filter. I'm like, no filter.
Jazz Crusaders, not Jazz Passengers.
Oh yeah. Sorry, Crusaders. I said Messengers. Sorry, Jazz Messengers is a different band out of New York from a different period. Sorry.
Yeah,
so true.
Jazz Crusaders, Jazz Messengers, Jazz Passengers. Yeah, these are the Crusaders. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna stumble on a few of these. This isn't
Okay.
strictly jazz, although it was shot at a jazz festival. This is Blackbird McKnight, who plays with Parliament Funkadelic.
Okay.
But this to me felt again, what I love about this is the reflection of his hands in the glasses.
Mhm.
You know, I'm often looking, you know, there's a million shots of guys playing guitar. How can I make it different? How can I do
Mhm.
something that I haven't seen before? I don't always get there.
Great job.
This was a struggle. This is where the equipment became an issue. This was shot in 2014 of VJ Iyer, and this club was incredibly dark. And if I was to shoot this today, I wouldn't have as much trouble because the cameras have a lot more capability in dark, in low light.
Mhm.
But back then it was an effort. And as much as I actually wanted to shoot this in color, I couldn't because the color image just, it wouldn't work.
Yeah,
There's
the
too much noise.
Mhm.
Yeah. But I think it does make a lovely black and white image, but it's an example of an image that was reprocessed again later.
Mhm.
One of the few, because the technology allowed me to actually make it a little bit better technically and make it more usable. Not always in the club. This was fun. This is a young player named Julio Xavier who's all over the place. He was just on tour with Casa Overall. Great young player, young being in his 30s in San Francisco, and he's often at residency at the Black Cat, and which is a lovely jazz club in a shitty neighborhood in San Francisco in the middle of the Tenderloin. And this was they had just finished playing. He was playing with Theo Croker that night, and I said, "Man, Julio, wouldn't it be great to do something up on the street, like with the late at night?" And he's like, "Let's do it." And I'm like, "All right, we got about 5 minutes, or I'm not going to have a camera when we leave here. So let's go up there." And so we shot that really quickly at about 3 a.m. out in San Francisco. Again, I'm always looking for shape.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, I'm looking for
And the
shape. I'm looking.
reflection.
Yeah, you'll see me do this more than once, and bass players are great for this. I do have a few tricks that I'll sometimes pull out. Bass players are some of my favorite people to shoot, just because the bass is so graphic. This is Curtis Lundy. The image before was Marcus Shelby. I love shooting Curtis Lundy. He is just so expressive. But the actual the bass itself is so graphic. There, I use the reflection again. That and this is Ben Riley. This is one of my personal favorite photographs. And to me, I'm successful if you go back in just a second. We're never gonna make it through all my pictures, so we're gonna probably go quickly. But that little bit of movement in his hand there, like I don't care. You know, a lot of photographers, I don't know how many people on this call are photographers. They love to talk about gear and they love to talk about sharpness and how many frames a second and all that. I don't care if an image is sharp. I care if you get a feeling from it. If you can feel, my favorite image of John Coltrane by Roy DeCarva, it is and there's nothing in focus. There's motion. It's out of focus. It's grainy. It's too contrasty. There's everything technically wrong with it. Every time I see that image, I can hear Coltrane, and that's what I'm going for. And keep moving.
And the music
Dr.
stands
Lonnie
always
Smith.
getting away, don't they, Robert? Music stands always getting away.
Yeah, I'm always looking for ways to shoot through it. And I'm actually also not opposed to removing a microphone or removing something simple. I won't ever take one expression from, one image and paste it into another. But for instance, if there was in the top right corner of this image, a microphone or a light that I didn't like, I'm not precious. I'm not a journalist. I don't think of myself. I am documenting a moment, but I have no problem altering something relatively minor.
Yeah.
For those jazz fans are out there, this is an interesting story. This is Chris Botti. And I don't like Chris Botti's music on record. I'm never going to put a Chris Botti record on ever. Live performance, he's stunning. His band was incredible. everything about it was amazing. And I said to Greg Bridges, the great jazz DJ, Oakland jazz DJ, I said, man, I didn't hear that coming. And Greg looked at me and he said, never judge these guys by what they record.
Ah,
And and so this was a fun night because it was one where I kind of had to let go of my preconceptions. And yeah, but you can keep going.
ah,
And this is
Fernand,
Cyrus
yes,
Chestnut.
Cyrus. Yes,
And
Cyrus.
the next 3 or 4 images, well, one, it's a good example of how you can capture different moments within a show. And this image and the next image have just this is a moment of quiet contemplation. And this just seconds later is something completely different. And I feel like the energy and the emotion conveyed in the image is different. And again, this was Cyrus last year. So I'll often get to work with these guys multiple years and get to know them. This funny story about this is not long after this, maybe right after this picture, the image I got was Cyrus looking straight at me. This was in a small club called Cafe Stritch in San Jose. And I was shooting with a 50 millimeter lens right down near the end of the piano, out of the way, but small club. And Cyrus looked at me and I thought, oh shit, I got too close. All right, I got to back away. And years later, when this next picture was taken, I said, I saw him again. He knows me a little bit. And I said, Cyrus, man, I'm really sorry. Last time he's like, yeah, that was all right. You do you. But I thought for sure he was mad at me. I got in his way, but apparently I didn't. But yeah.
Robert Cyrus has performed twice in North Carolina, and I know what you mean, but he's very affable to photographers because I got a couple of shots of him too in a church.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
it's funny. He was playing in Durham at Duke last year, and I didn't get a chance to go. I had something else going, but
that's the one I saw. I was there.
Yeah, one of the great things about moving from New York and then San Francisco to Durham is, again, I don't usually pay because I'm usually invited by the festival or the club or the musician. But when I did pay to see him in San Francisco, I think it was $65 a ticket at SF Jazz, and he was playing at Duke for $15 a ticket. And so that was nice.
Yeah.
That's that sponsored that's that sponsored program they do at Duke. You're right. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Drummers are the hardest. I hate shooting drummers because there's too much stuff in the way, and they're constantly moving.
Yes.
So I'm always looking. I will often challenge myself. I never leave a show without having shot the drummer a few times, and 9 times out of 10 I don't walk away with anything I want to use. But sometimes I'll get hired to shoot a band led by a drummer like Casa Overall or Kendrick Scott, and then I'm like, oh man, it's gonna be a tough night. Keep going. This is an interesting image because, like I said, I don't ever go back, or very, very rarely go back and reprocess an image, but I will sometimes go back and find something I missed the first time because I tend to edit the night of a show. It's just, I have the energy, I'm excited, I can already think about the pictures I took. I remember when, during what song, or about what part in the evening, there's an image that I want, so I can go back and find it. And I very rarely will go back after that and look. Everything's about reacting in the moment, how I process it, all that. So if I shoot a show, I'm often up till 4 or 5 in the morning processing some images, or even if I don't process, I'm making my selections that night. And in putting this together, I thought, oh, you know what? It'd be nice to have a picture of Kurt Elling. But I don't think I have any good ones from last time. And then I went through and I looked and I found this image, and I had never selected it. I don't know why, because it's got all those things I look for. It's got that moment, it's got that gesture, it's that in between. I can feel that he's hearing the music. And so I just found this one a couple of days ago. It was shot in 2021. And the following images from
background too. I presume that's an image in the background.
It is. It gets really tricky to shoot at. So this was at San Jose Jazz, where I've been the official photographer there since 2012. And I hate shooting on the main stage there because there's a giant video screen behind them. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes it's in the middle of the day. Jazz, nobody looks good at 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoon in the hot sun. Mm-hmm. And particularly jazz musicians. So one of the tricky things is how to deal with that screen, and I've gotten better at it over the years. That's one of the nice things about shooting in the same place over and over again.
Yeah.
I've shot at the Vanguard in New York many times. I've shot Cafe Stritch, and that's no longer there. Black Cat in San Francisco. Certain clubs that I've shot in over and over again. I know where to go. This is Charlie Hunter, who I started photographing in the early '90s in a tiny little club in San Francisco called the Elbow Room, and now he lives here lives in North Carolina as well, in Greensboro, and I've been lucky enough to keep working with him. And this was that show with Kurt Elling.
Mm.
This is an interesting image because this is Booker T and Booker T and the MGs. And again, another tricky thing to shoot are piano players, because you often can't see the hands on the piano. It's hard. You want to see the hands on the piano. You want to see an expression. And the way he was set up at the organ, I was never going to get his face and his hands in the shot. And so I decided that I needed to look at what was happening graphically with that organ. And this was shot on the main stage at San Jose in the middle of the afternoon. Again, I hate it. Trees in the background, building in the background. But I kept going back to thinking, well, what would this be like if he was a church organ player, And so I was waiting for that little moment, and just the way his lips are pursed, his head is back. There's that gesture in his arm, that light that's coming right underneath the microphone by his arm. It just worked for me at that moment. But it's a very
the way you've captured his neck position, his shoulders. It actually, at least to me, I can see his hands without the hands being in the photos.
Right. And you can hear it, right? You hear the organ. You know what that sounds like. That's a long press on the organ. He's not playing quick like Cyrus was in that shot.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm going for. And when I'm successful, I know it. But this was a tough show. This is an example of where you need to see those hands sometimes. And what I love about this shot, this is Javier. I'm blanking on Santiago, another young up and coming musician who I think is relocated to Minneapolis. Was in the Bay Area for a long time, and it's that look that he's giving. He's actually looking at Julio Xavier, the bass player, and he's waiting. And he's made that note. He's played the note. The note's pressed down, but you see his eyes locked in that way that musicians get. And I often look for that. I look for that locked in moment.
James Carter. I'm from Detroit, Robert.
Yeah, well, you got a few Detroit folk coming up in here too.
Where were you standing for the last image?
So that's a small club, and the band is kind of set up in the center, and the audience kind of rings around them in a half arc. So I was squatting because I don't tend to stand, kind of almost right in front of the band at like near one of the very front tables in the club, and probably squatting and raising my camera up slightly so that I could get above and get a look down. I don't want to be in anybody's way. And so a lot of times I will often, before a show starts, if I know I'm going to be there and know I'm going to be moving around and know where I'm going to be, very quietly, come over to somebody sitting at the table and say, hey, I'm photographing the show tonight. I may block you for a second. If I'm there, I won't be there long. I'll get out of your way, just to let you know. And when you do that, if you don't do that, people will get annoyed. And that because you're taking away from their experience, or they're afraid you're going to take away from their experience, or you're not being sensitive to the fact that they paid to be there. And I'm trying to get my job done, and a lot of times I'm being paid to be there. But that little gesture of saying, "Hey, I know that this might be intrusive. I'll be as careful as I can," makes a huge difference. And people tend to then be really almost helpful in trying to let me move around and get what I need to do. And it's that little bit of acknowledgement, I think, that sometimes makes a big difference. The cameras have gotten a lot quieter over the years, which is good. Yeah. Christian Sands here, wonderful player. And again, I'm very, very influenced by Francis Wolff and the work that he did for Blue Note over the years. And when you look back at a lot of his pictures, particularly because he's looking at people on stage, he's often looking up. I find that's again, I'm struggling to figure out how do I get the piano, the face, and that in there. So this was at the Hammer Theater, where the stage is actually really quite low. So in order for me to be looking up, I got to be really squatted down and kind of right with my camera right on the floor of the stage to get that. But that's where that was.
This
I
looks
wish
like
I could
another.
remember this. Billie Holiday.
Yeah, with the microphone and the garden. Yeah.
Yeah,
Who,
I
who
don't
is
think it
this
was a
artist?
Billie. I was gonna say I wish I could remember.
Okay,
This was I think that was also San Jose Jazz Festival, and that's 2012. And I have a note somewhere, and I fortunately
that's
don't have
okay.
it in front of me. Yeah, you can keep moving. From Detroit as well, William. That's Regina Carter.
Regina Carter, who's, by the way, is James Carter's cousin. Did you know that? I didn't
I
realize
did know that. Yeah, I did know that.
Yeah.
Violinists are almost as hard as drummers because they always got that microphone, and I find them really tricky. But I see that as the challenge.
Oh, yes.
And you'll see here on the left, it's framed by a mic stand, right? That little, but I didn't take that out because it really helps, position you in. You see right on her arm the top of a guitar. It's just I will try and use what's on the stage to help me frame things.
And you don't have much choice either.
Yeah.
There you go. I gave her a picture like that in color once,
yeah.
and I was able to give it to her.
So this is a great example of the effect of a vintage lens. And again, if you were to pixel peep in this, and lots of photographers love to. Matter of fact, I was told recently by somebody who was critiquing my work that I never took pictures that were in focus. And my answer to that is I don't really care. Thank you, but no thanks. But this is shot on a lens that was made in the Soviet Union in the 1950s called the Helios 40. It's an 85 millimeter 1.5 lens. It has this wonderful effect of swirling the background. So if you look in the background, the little bits of light that they call it the bokeh, right? That you'll see that they're football shaped or cat's eye shaped, which is it's an optical flaw. I mean, technically lenses are, the best lenses will have a round, perfectly round shape, and if you'll notice the way that football shape changes as you go from the far left toward the center, is it creates this illusion of a circle around the image. But what that does to, and it's completely, I mean, even if I wanted to try and get the image sharp on the edges of the image, it'll never be sharp. It's going to always be out of focus. I'm lucky if I can nail focus toward the eyes or toward the center. But what it does is it brings you into the moment, and it really helps capture that. And so that, to me, this is a great example, and this is a personal favorite image of mine. I took it. This was shot in March in San Jose as part of the San Jose Jazz Festival collaboration with Ukrainian musicians that were there for war. He was the piano player. His name is Paul, and I can't remember his last name. And he was playing with Mark Juliana, the drummer. Keep going, Harar. We're actually making good time. I put a lot of pictures together.
Good for you.
And again, graphically, this I don't mind that I don't see his face there.
Yeah.
It's a young piano player. This is playing with Terrence Blanchard in 2012.
But great, you got Terrence is out of focus, and the piano player is in focus, which is great.
Yeah, and again, trying to use space graphically and looking for that moment. So the way his shoulder is kind of hiked up and his finger is a little off, those are the moments that I'm looking for, because to me, I feel the music.
Joe Sample.
Yeah, Jazz Crusaders again, and an image that needed to be in color. Yeah. Maceo Parker. Keep moving through. So one of the things that I love, and I don't know if anybody's familiar with the work of Roy Diacarva, and this is a young piano player, Julius Rodriguez, up and coming player. But one of the great things about Roy's work, whether he's shooting jazz musicians or other work, he's a African-American photographer who worked in New York mostly um, from the 50s and through the early 90s. A lot of his images had things emerging from the darkness. And I love that idea of you having to spend some time with it and for things to come out and to be subtle. And this image is difficult to see on screens because everybody's screen is a little different. I think it's much more successful as a print. Some people are probably only seeing something that's black, and others can start to see the details in there. But again, I started to work in the last couple of years trying to figure out how to do that. And I this is another personal favorite. And you're going to see a few more images coming up with that idea of things emerging from the shadows. I call my work jazz shadows. I work in the shadows. All the interest is in the shadows. This image of Roy Hargrove, who's somebody I met when we were both, he's a couple years older than me. So I was 17 or 18. He was in his early 20s in New York coming up late at night at Bradley's. And he never once remembered me. I mean, I must have sat down with him 20 or 30 times. And he often had some issues that kept him from remembering a lot. But, you know, but Roy never remembered me. But this was shot about 4 months before he died. There's a few images. This is at Monterey Jazz Festival. And this is also, again, coming from the shadows. And he was a mess. But the minute he put that horn to his mouth, it was like there was nothing wrong.
You're right,
and,
Robert. Once he played, all the mess went away.
Yeah. And
again, love his flugelhorn playing was unbelievable.
Yeah. And this is that moment in between. Again, I knew when I took this picture, I saw it in my head. You know, it was Francis Wolff. And I would love to be shooting more. I've shot a lot of rock musicians in the studio, but not a lot of jazz musicians. And I've been bugging Charlie Hunter to let me come. He keeps telling me his studio is too small. I've asked Branford. He kind of told me no way. You know, I've been trying to get somebody to let me come and just be a fly on the wall in the studio. And one of these days I'm going to get somebody to do it. The guys in Butcher Brown told me, yeah, sure. And then they never, I message them and they ghost me every time that happens. Right. So one day somebody's going to let me just kind of sit in the studio and just shoot. But this, again, emerging from the shadows, this is an interesting series. And tell me if I'm talking too much, guys, and interrupt me with questions.
No, it's very interesting.
How are you meeting what are you using to measure the light? How do you meter these pictures that are coming?
I use the internal meter in the camera. Sometimes I'll use the internal spot meter, partially because these days I'm now shooting all on. This actually was shot on a DSLR, so you're looking through an optical viewfinder. But now I'm using cameras that have digital viewfinders, LCD viewfinders. So I'm actually able to see the exposure in the viewfinder, and I can just adjust it on the fly. And so
this is backstage or is it on stage?
Yeah. So this, I'm going to explain this. There's a series of images here. This is Marcus Shelby and his orchestra. And so this is backstage. I was standing in the wings. He was watching his orchestra getting ready to go on. And the next few images I hope they tell a story of that, right? And if you keep going through, you'll see that story evolve. And again, I'm always looking to tell a story. Tiffany Austin singing.
Oh, what a great shot. What a great
Thank
shot.
you. And my personal favorite of that series is this one. This one here.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah.
The conductor.
And again, I want you to look at this image, and I want you to look at this image and say, I don't know when this was taken. You know, and I think that honestly, I was talking to somebody about this recently, and I said, I think you can look at this image and you can think it might have been taken in 1955. And he corrected me, and he said, nope, there's a woman in that playing saxophone in the far left. That would have never happened in 1955.
And one more, Robert. That's even nice. The hairstyle. Didn't wear the hair.
Yeah.
But otherwise,
well, you know, here's talking about this, and one of the things that's interesting. I'm going to divert here a second. I have another series of images moving to the south. So I love shooting jazz, but I love taking pictures. And in the last 3 years, I'm no longer making my primary living as a photographer for the first time. So I no longer have to think about how does this body of work fit into what I'm doing or what I'm promoting. I just can just go shoot. So I was somebody who knows I like to photograph musicians said, "Hey, can you do me a favor? We have these friends who are in a band. They're a church band at this African American holiness church in Greensboro, and they could really use some photographs. And would you come and photograph?" And I said, "Absolutely." And you know, being a white guy from New York, originally in San Francisco, a Southern holiness church was something I'd never experienced before. I will tell you that that guitar solo on Amazing Grace was one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard. But you know, talking about this, because I think when you think about photography and when I think about the photographers who have influenced me, every single one of them, except for Francis Wolff, who was Jewish from New York, has been a Black African American photographer at a time when the only, I mean, other than, and I just blanked on his name, the guy who directed Shaft, and Gordon Parks,
Gordon Parks,
you know, who shot for Life magazine. Many of these artists, whether they be musicians or photographers, struggled. And so to me, like that African American church was interesting because I said, okay, I'm happy to do this, but we need to talk about something. I don't want to be the white guy coming in here gawking at the Black experience with a camera. And they turned to me and said, "We invited you." And what was interesting to me there, because when I shoot music, I'm invited. But to me, there is a story, still a story to be told in this country. Photographers, all of us have an obligation to tell an American story as American photographers. And race has to be part of that story, and race has to be part of that story in jazz. And I haven't figured out how to do it yet. But I still think that has to be as part of the current dialogue. And when we look at the idea that music brings us together, photography brings us together, and this is a complete tangent, and I don't know where I'm going here, guys, so forgive me. But to me, it becomes something that we have to talk about. And when we think about that, and we think about the privilege that we have, jazz has moved from a music that was in the clubs to a concert hall music. And that's also changed who's playing it and the way we deal with it. And I think, you know, we document that. And to not document that is to not document that experience as photographers and experience that's changed. I think we're remiss. And I don't know what the story is. I don't know how we do it yet. But somewhere at some time before I'm done with what I'm doing with this body of work, we're going to address it. I don't know how, but you know, sorry, that was a complete tangent. You may want to edit this out of the video. I'm going to probably piss somebody off.
Best leave it in, Robert. Best leave it in. Best leave it in.
Lucy Woodward, again, an image that just needed to be in color. And I don't know why. I couldn't tell you. This is
Fred Hirsch.
Yeah.
It was the dress.
That's Fred Hirsch. Yeah, that's Fred
yeah.
Hirsch. And again, looking from the wings. I'm always looking for those quiet moments. Yeah. You can keep going. I'm looking for things that work graphically. You know, so to me, just the position of sticks, the straightness of his back, all that was just a perfect.
You found a solution to shooting the drummers. You got to shoot them from the side because there's too much.
Yeah, sometimes.
You almost
but again,
because,
this is the graphic again. You know, I think of this as graphics, and then I find that spot and I wait for it to happen. Tadaka Uno, I believe is his name.
Keith Jarrett and Bill Evans bent over the kid, you know. Yeah, there you go. You're on the side again, Robert. You figure
I'm on the side. Well, not always with the drummers, but yeah, it becomes important because otherwise there's too much in the way.
Because between the hi-hats and the cymbals, you can't, sometimes you barely get the face, much less the drumsticks and the arms. So
are you guys liking the personal stories here? Should I tell another one?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So this is a band called Pink Martini, and Ari Shapiro, who is part of NPR, is a singer for Pink Martini. And for the Jazz Fest, San Jose Jazz in 2019, my mom had died 5 days before the festival, and I had been up in Portland dealing with some family things, and I flew back to shoot the festival. And as you can imagine, I was pretty sensitive. Well, growing up with a single mom in a New York City apartment who was a school teacher, every Sunday was cleaning day. And my mom would pop an 8-track cassette of Helen Reddy's greatest hits and blast I Am Woman as her and my brother would sing along, vacuuming and cleaning the house. Now, that night, Pink Martini busts out with a cover of I Am Woman, which nobody covers that song. Nobody remembers that song. And so they're singing it in duet, Ari singing it with duet with somebody else. And I just start crying, right? Good thing I had autofocus on that lens. Otherwise, nothing was going to be sharp. So afterwards, I went backstage. I was talking with Ari and I said, listen, Ari, I listen to you on NPR all the time. And you're always telling me stories. I got to tell you a story. So I told him that story and he looked at me and said, can I give you a hug? And from that day onward, I put this up on Instagram. I liked Ari. Ari then, responded on Instagram and continually will send me, we've had a little private message back and forth on Instagram. I'll put up a jazz image and he'll like it and he'll send me a little note and I'll send him a little note. I've never spoken to him again. There's maybe been 10 or 15 of those little notes back and forth since 2019. But it's that personal connection that I sometimes feel that I make with some of the pictures too that become really special to me because, we all love music. We all love musicians. They're all our heroes. I'm a big fanboy no matter how many people I've met. And so that was my little story about that.
Danica commented that these are great tips and she loves the image quotations of other artists.
I'm not sure what she meant by that, but okay.
Maybe she can tell us.
There she is.
Yes, there I am. Well, I thought about mentioning some like Wolf, Francis Wolf, and other photographers that you were.
Oh, I see.
Referring to
the homage.
I know this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
And some other musicians and some other. Okay, and some other musicians' attitude for Miles, for example, and others. So I like it. Thanks.
Oh, great, thanks. Yeah, this is Kendrick Scott.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh,
keep going. Back to the drummers, off to the side again.
to the side.
This is Corey, who's the drummer for a band out of Richmond, Virginia called Butcher Brown, who are not straight ahead jazz, but really fantastic young group of musicians. Highly recommend checking them out.
They played in Raleigh. They played in Raleigh recently.
Yeah. Again, I hate those organ players, but I felt like that one worked. Not strictly jazz, but at a jazz festival. This is Common.
Common.
Yeah. It's funny. I almost took both of these pictures
from Chicago.
Yeah. And I almost took both of these pictures out because they weren't jazz. And my wife said to me, but yeah, they're all about gesture, which is part of what you talk about. And so, again, it's those little moments that I'm often looking for. And this is Keon Harold, who is a fantastic trumpet player.
Sure.
You'll see him come up again later in this presentation with his own band, which is a straight ahead jazz band, but he was playing with Common that night. This is, if you go next, this is Gifton Gellin, who's a young trumpet player out of the Bahamas. If you can go back to that last one just for a second. This is before the show. And again, I will often take pictures before the show during sound check and things like that if I can, because I feel like, again, I'm able to make a connection. And what's interesting about this is if you look very closely in those sunglasses, you see a little hint of the eye. And again, that's that little bit of something coming from the shadow that I sometimes look for. I feel like you can sense that he's looking at me by the, just the position of his face and the softness of his face. But it wouldn't have worked for me if I didn't have that tiny little hint of the eye in there. Yeah. Somebody told me about describing his music was he got all of Roy Hargrove's good habits and not his bad ones. This is an image that could have only been shot with a modern lens, an autofocus and a fast shutter speed. You know, if you look, you could see the bits of spit coming out into the air around him. You know, so I don't exclusively use the vintage lenses, although I am moving toward using them more and more, particularly because I feel like I can rely on my technique. I always worry a little bit if I'm hired to shoot something, I need to make sure I'm delivering what the festival needs, particularly the documentation of a show or being able to use it for promotion. So somebody asked earlier how they're being used. A lot of times when I shoot for a festival, 90% of the images that I give them are in color. And 90% of the images that I use for myself are the ones I choose for black and white. You know, and that's just my own personal preference. Keep moving through.
Yes.
Candace Springs, again, just struggling always to find ways to successfully shoot piano players. And sometimes I do think they really work. There are times that they don't, but you know, this one I particularly liked.
Yeah.
And this was the drummer that she had with her. And back again to things being sharp. This image is out of focus. Every bit of it is out of focus. I don't care. To me, it's all about how that feels, you know, in that moment.
But you got the drumsticks in motion. You can tell that's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
You got the drumsticks.
This is another example of a vintage lens, and I'll point out one of the technical things that is, quote, wrong with this image. Aside from the fact that it's probably not tack sharp everywhere, if you look at his hands and the horn and the highlights around them, they appear to have a little bit of a glow, a blooming to them. That is an optical flaw. Modern lenses are created to remove that. And people will do that in post-production, and you can add a glow, or if you're printing in the darkroom, you can pull a nude stocking really, really tight over the lens and diffuse it, which is what Mapplethorpe used to do in order to get that effect. I love the fact that the lens will do that naturally.
Nice.
And again, it's an optical flaw. This is, yes, that is the same Soviet lens. Yeah.
This is that 85.
That's
Robert,
a Helios 85. Yeah.
If you flip that one back again, if you wouldn't mind, pop it back. Aren't you also getting the glow off the pianist's face and off the jacket? The guy
anywhere there's a highlight, the highlights are going to bloom.
Okay.
And that lens is only sharp in the middle. I mean, it's sharp in the middle, but it's sharp nowhere else. The interesting thing in this next image is a great example of it. So the war in the Ukraine has caused the prices on these Soviet lenses to really spike, and they don't make them anymore. And the ones I like are not made anymore. So I thought, you know, I better grab another one of these now because prices are going up. And if anything ever goes wrong, if I ever, you know, anything happens to this lens, I'll never be able to get another one. Well, the first one that I bought had a scratch on the back element, which doesn't really affect most of the image quality. But what it does do when it is at a very particular angle, and I've never quite figured it out, it will cause a flare. So I bought a second copy of the lens, and that lens doesn't flare because it's clean. It doesn't have the scratch on it. Okay. And I love the flare.
And I presume that even when they manufactured them, the flow in each lens was different because it was unintentional.
Right. Well, some of it is a flaw. Yeah, I mean, some of the flaws are from the optical design. If we're going to geek out on it a little bit, the Helios lens is based on a biotar design. And so what happened was in the 1930s, the Germans developed this biotar design. They made a biotar lens. During World War II, the Soviets took possession as war reparations of the Zeiss plant. And they took the optical designs and brought them back to the Soviet Union. But the glass that they used in the Soviet Union wasn't the same quality, so they had to alter the optical scheme a little bit, which is how you ended up with some of these flaws. Again, that's going deep down the geeky rabbit hole, but yeah. This is a modern lens, same show, right? Very different in how it feels. I like both images. I don't necessarily think that one is better than the other, but I think that used correctly, the imperfections in the old glass give me something special.
Well, Robert, if I can ask you, you can see the focus range. The focus is much better than just in the center.
Yeah.
But my question is that another 85? You
No,
said modern lens. What's can you remember?
that's likely a 70 to 200
Okay.
Canon RF.
The reason I bring that up, I got converted into using 85s over 50s after I saw a spread in a magazine in which a guy shot some basketball pictures, and his point was fast 85 can get you some stuff that you won't believe. And I've noticed. So you're talking about
Yeah, I mean, to me, they're all tools. I have over 80 lenses.
Okay.
And my current favorite is and I don't have it here to show you, but my current favorite is I modified a lens made for a magic lantern in the 1890s, which was a predecessor to a slide projector to work on my modern cameras. And that's my favorite. Now, I have a brand new $3,000 85 millimeter 1.2 Canon RF lens. It is the greatest technical achievement Canon's ever made, and I pick up that 85 from the Soviet Union a lot more than I do that, which cost me $450.
Why am I not? I'm not surprised. It's got more character.
Keep going. Yeah, this is that Soviet lens again.
Okay.
And again, nothing sharp, but it just feels like I get these moments with it. This is the most recent thing that I shot for San Jose Jazz. This was shot in April. And this guy's name is Jahari Stampley, and he was playing here at Marquise Hill. But
yeah, his mom actually. I know his mom very well. She's a
really?
yeah, she's a saxophonist, and she has her own fitness center. And she also sings sometimes. And I have interviewed her. I got to know her by interviewing her for a local Chicago jazz magazine. They're lovely people.
Yeah, he's an incredible player.
Yeah,
I can't wait to hear what he does. You
yeah.
can keep moving, because this is him again. Again, my Soviet lens. It's okay. This is Mark Juliana. This was part of the San Jose Jazz Festival. Again, gesture. If you look at his hand position, and again from the side, right?
From the side, Robert.
I got some tricks. If you keep going, Ambrose Akinmasori. What's funny is, and I love his music. He did a thing for the San Jose Jazz for this Ukrainian musician, and it was challenging. It was very, very, very challenging. I mean, think, Loft Jazz 1972. There was a lot of noise going on, and it's funny because this was the noisiest, most atonal performance that I ever saw him do, but this moment here doesn't feel like what the show felt like. And what's interesting to me is I often feel like when I'm successful, you get the feeling of the show and you hear the music. And this to me feels like that really quiet moment while he's listening, and that's not what was happening. So it's an interesting image because I think it's successful and I really like it, but I think what I get from it is very different from what was happening in the moment.
And also the glass of water on the floor is the is the element. You got to look at it again. Oh, okay.
There's that flare again that I can only get from that
from the lens, from the Helios.
That scratched element.
That's beautiful stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, I particularly like the reflection in the piano. And again, this is actually the same series of images from San Jose. This is a young singer named J. Hoard, Hoard. He is fantastic, and he was singing with Casa Overall that night. Fantastic show. Definitely worth checking out. And this is Casa. Those drummers are hard. Again,
Yeah.
and this is a modern lens. You know, what really struck me about this image for me was, and I don't know why I thought this, but this felt like like something that would have been a TV still from The Tonight Show in 1964. There was something about the light and all that felt like a old TV studio. And again, you know, it felt like it had a timeless quality, and that's often what I'm looking for.
Which lens did you shoot this one again, Rob? That last one?
I wouldn't. I'd have to look. I'm not sure.
Okay. It's okay. But
yeah,
the depth of field even got to the shaker on the guy's hand behind.
Yeah. Generally, for those who want to geek out, how I tend to shoot a festival is I tend to have 4 cameras with me at all times. Something I learned from one of my other heroes, Jim Marshall. Who,
only 4. Only 4.
Yeah, I bring 2 Canon R5s, which are brand new, ultra modern, super fast cameras, and I have a 24-70 autofocus lens and a 70-200 autofocus lens, and that is what I use because I know I'm going to get what I need for the festival. And then I often have a Leica Q that I love on my shoulder. And then I will often shoot with, now it's moved from being a Fuji X-T3 to an XH2. And on that, I'll have a vintage lens mounted. Okay. Or sometimes I'll switch it up and I'll move that vintage lens onto one of my R5s. But I always kind of go first with the first, you know, 10 or 15 minutes shooting with my modern stuff, because I know that I'm going to be able to deliver to the client. And then once I feel like I've gotten, you know, what they're going to need, then I'll start mixing it up. But that image, for instance, of Fred Hirsch on the piano solo on the stage, shot from the wings, that was shot on my Leica.
Oh, okay.
Keep moving.
That photo of Fred Hirsch actually brought back a memory for me, which like it's not relevant, but it spoke to me a lot because it immediately brought back that memory of an experience.
I would love to hear that memory. If you don't want to share it, go ahead. Here's Julio again. This is.
It's just for the sake of the video. Afterwards, I'll tell you the memory.
Okay, fair enough. This is Julio again, and again, Julio shows up in the Bay Area. He's that bass player everybody calls when they come through, right? So I've gotten to know Julio over the years, and what you'll see a couple other images of him, I think, before the end, and he's one of the most expressive players out there. He unfortunately had a freak accident where he was working in the kitchen and severed a nerve on a kitchen knife that was falling, and almost thought he would never be able to play bass again. He's got the function back in 3 of his 5 fingers in his right hand. So he's playing again, but yeah.
Like Django.
But yeah. Keep going. I'll tell him that next time I see him.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is all the same show. And again, I wanted to kind of show a number of images that I'll sometimes get from one performance. And being this is the most recent one I shot, I was excited about it. Bobby Watson.
Yes.
I know we're going to run out of time, so let's start going through quickly. And I'll stop because there's some images here I definitely would love to share with you guys. That's Bobby Watson. Donald Harrison. Oh, don't go quite that fast.
Okay.
That was Javon Jackson's horn. That's Javon's horn, which is just beautiful.
It is.
Keep going. This is Keon Harold again with his own band, and again that gesture of just that one finger right there. And there's that flare. That's that scratched element. It's my secret tool.
Another drummer?
Who's that?
Yeah. Oh gosh, I knew somebody was going to ask me.
You can't. It's okay. It'll come.
He was playing with Cyrus Chestnut that night too. I'll look it up and send you guys after.
Okay.
Keep on going. Omar Sosa, great Cuban musician based in the Bay Area. Again, trying to use that piano.
Oh
There's an
yeah.
image. Yeah, since I don't have the deck in front of me, I don't know how much farther it is. There's one in particular I want to be able to share before we have to wrap up.
Yeah, there's about 25 pictures left.
Okay, so we have about a little less than 15, so we'll go through quickly.
Bobby again.
There's
Bobby.
Bobby again. Yeah, there's a few of Bobby in here, and there's two coming up of Bobby where he's sitting, where he was
Donald
listening.
Harrison again. I like that.
Yeah,
Donald.
Yeah, this is a nice
And
one.
again, this is backstage.
Yeah.
Particularly
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that moment. That's the images I was looking for. And sometimes, you know, you just got to be part of, to me, being a good photographer. As I said, it's about listening, and that applies when you're shooting nature photography. Whatever you're doing, it's always about listening. And I as you can tell, I love to talk, but I think, and here I actually heard him practicing. I was backstage, in between sets. I said, "Where is he? I got to find him." Right?
Yeah.
It's about try to be alert. Yeah, and you keep moving through.
Bobby. Yeah.
There's Bobby.
This is-
And this,
yeah.
I felt like this is again an homage to Francis Wolff. You know, not that I want to copy. This is an image that I never selected until 2 days ago. That's Charles McPherson.
Yes, it
And
sure is.
I debated about, I wanted to put this in here. Here's a question to you guys. I don't know how I feel about this image yet. What do you guys think?
I heard him play, so I'm
I
biased.
think it's a keeper.
Yeah, I think so too.
Okay. Okay, good to know.
what he's thinking about.
Robert,
Yeah.
Seems like
quite
a
frankly,
deep
when I
thought
think of,
there.
you've done something that I found true too. Jazz players listen so hard to the other person playing. That's why I think those pictures of them with their horn but not actually playing, just like Regina Carter, you know, more than the few good pictures I have, they are of the player listening to somebody else. It is not them
Right. And
actually
here
playing.
I was looking at when I saw this again, I saw that graphic shape of the saxophone and the body being almost a mirror of each other. I'll tell a story while we go through, because I think Danica said she liked the stories, but there's a story that Herbie Hancock tells about Miles, and I think I'll make it real. It's a long story. You could find his story on YouTube, but essentially he was playing with Miles in the mid '60s, and he hit the wrong note, and he said, "I wanted to crawl under the piano. I just couldn't even play for a second because I knew it was wrong." And then I was waiting for Miles to look at me and give me one of those looks. But immediately after that, Miles played something that made what I played right. And he said, Miles didn't see it as a mistake.
Yeah.
He saw it as something that happened, and that it was his job to react to what had happened. And so that to me is the essence of jazz. And it's also about photography, right? It's about art. It's about whatever you create. And as a photographer, my job is to react to what's happening, to listen, to pay attention, and to capture that. And I hope if I'm successful, again, I said it before, when you look at this image, I hope you can hear Gary Bartz right here.
Yeah.
I look for those moments, you know, and this isn't an in-between moment, but it is an in-between moment because the note's not completed, right? I'm not looking for that finale of I'm done. I'm looking for whatever it is that comes to take you there.
Creating, yeah.
Yeah.
There's Gary.
There's Gary again.
Hello, player.
Yeah. And again, these images aren't sharp. I don't care. I really want you to kind of, again, come out of the shadows, hear the music, feel that moment. That I just feel like I'm not really concerned with technical aspects of what I'm shooting. I'm good at it. I know how to do it. So it's a conscious decision when I decide to shoot in a way that it doesn't matter. Isaiah Sharkey, another young upcoming guitar player, fantastic player.
Who's that, Robert?
It's not Vincent Herring. It's he's playing with Vincent Herring.
Okay, it's okay.
I'll have to look it up. I've forgotten.
Sure.
I know it. I know
Billy
the answer.
Hart. Billy Hart.
Was it? Yeah,
Billy
there
Hart?
you go. Thank you.
Billy Hart,
Yeah, that
thank
was
you.
Billy Hart. Yep.
Billy
There's
Hart.
Branford.
With
Yeah,
a
that's
bow tie
Branford.
on. How about that?
Yeah.
Wow.
With a bow tie
That was
on.
it. That was a tribute. It's so funny. I had dinner with Branford. We were talking about this night. It was a tribute to Charlie Parker that he did in at Monterey in 2017, and it was Joe Lovano, Jimmy Heath, Branford Marsalis, and Joshua Redmond.
Wow.
And
Lord.
yeah, and it was what a show. But when he was talking to me about it, he said something. He's like, I said something about what he played that night, and I said it was interesting to hear Jimmy play more bluesy. He's like, that's because that's what Jimmy can play. He couldn't play that other stuff. It's like he couldn't do that. Like, and I was like, yeah, but he was great. He said, I didn't say he wasn't great. I just said he can't play that.
Play that other stuff.
Yeah. Those drummers, man, they're so hard to shoot. There's Joshua.
There's
Redmond.
Joshua.
Yeah, yeah.
Robert, I got him with,
And
when he gets into his solos, he raises that right leg off in the air. You know,
Mhm.
Joshua, when Joshua's got it, because he raises that right leg up, I got
Well,
that
what
shot.
I love about this too is again, it's the shape. It's there's that shoulder up and that curve to the body, and
Fingers.
yeah, you'll see some of Joe Lovano coming up. Yeah,
there's Joe.
Yeah, different night than that. Than the night. This isn't the same night as when he played with Branford, but
Branford. Okay.
Yeah. Keep going. I forget his name. I was going to kill me. We were playing bass with Regina Carter that night. I have everybody's name written down, and fortunately, I'm not home, and I didn't bring that notebook.
But
with
like
me,
you
so
say,
apologies.
the bass just gives you so much body to the picture. No,
the bass is graphic.
The instrument, the instrument just does it. There he is, the mighty
There's
Chick.
Chick Corea. Yeah, and he was playing with Herbie Hancock that night on double grand pianos, and I didn't get a shot of Herbie. I did. That's him looking at Herbie, but I never got the shot of Herbie that I wanted that night. I couldn't get the right position in Monterey. That stage is so high that I had to go up into the bandstand and shoot with a long lens, getting down, and I couldn't get the angle on Herbie that worked that night. So I settled for this. Brad Meldau.
Meldau, okay.
Brad Meldau, yeah. Another particular favorite of mine. This is a favorite of mine. This is Russell Malone.
From behind, yeah.
And you see the audience in front of him.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a band called Fatso. This is another example of using old vintage glass. This is something that I never did this again after this because it was too hard, but this is actually shot on something called a Petzval lens that was made in the 1880s. And the f-stop is actually a little little piece of metal that goes in. It was designed to shoot daguerreotypes, and it swirls. It's only sharp in the middle. It's really, really slow. I think it looks great, and I love what it does in terms of framing this saxophone player and the out of focus areas and the background and the vignette that it has. But it's just too awkward to use, so I'll never do it again. But I was happy with this, and again, I just love how everybody around him in that moment. I think it was a successful photograph.
Oh, I love that. Dreads and a hoodie and a baseball cap.
Joel Ross.
Joel Ross, yeah, and he was really, really hard to shoot because he hides underneath that hoodie and the glasses and the baseball cap and the dreads. And but
Robert, what's his name again? I'm not familiar.
Joel Ross.
Joel Ross. Great player. Yeah. Yeah. Charlie Hunter again, and his crazy guitar. Now, Lee Fields is not technically a jazz singer, but I'm going to call it. And you see the effect of that vintage lens, that curve to the background. But again, technically the lens isn't sharp, but it's as sharp as I need it to be. It's photographers get really caught up, particularly, and no offense to William here, people in photo clubs, they're like, is that lens sharp? Somebody said to me, I gave them a vintage lens. It was a 105 Nikkor f2.8 from the 1970s. And he said to me, he's an amateur photographer, friend of mine, and he said, "Robert, is it going to be sharp enough?"
Yeah.
And I said,
yeah.
"Have you ever seen that picture of Afghan girl, the one that was on National Geographic?"
Yeah.
They used that lens to shoot that picture. Have you ever looked at that picture and said it's not sharp enough? I said, when you can take that picture, you can come talk to me about how sharp a lens is. And again, this is a great example of that. It's everything's wrong about that lens, but to me, everything's right. It's got to look.
I'm not offended, Rob.
And the last image is
I like
the
that.
worst.
The worst picture.
This is the worst picture I've ever taken in a live performance. So it takes a lot to get everybody so awkward. So, I mean, the guitar player is up in the air, his feet aren't touching the ground. I mean, even the guy on the keyboards in the background is not in a good position.
Robert,
So-
you're like this. This is definitely not an example of Motown choreography.
Right. That
They
is a
would
band
never-
called
you
Cool
never-
in the
you never
Gang.
you'd never get a Motown show looking like this. They're gonna say, "No, what
Yeah.
you are."
Yeah, well, that was a band called Cool in the Gang, who you guys
Oh
probably
yeah, I
remember.
remember Cool.
Yeah.
But they were fun. They were fun to listen to, though.
Yeah.
They were a lot
Yeah.
of fun. Too funny.
So I am so honored that you guys asked me to do this. I really
Thank
hope
you.
you enjoyed the pictures.
Absolutely.
This was a great session. And I
Yeah.
think this is our 12th or 13th session. It's already been a year we've been doing these.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's funny. I'm the worst critic of my work, and when I put this piece together for it, I very rarely think, you know, it's pretty good. And
Yeah, it was-
and I'm really proud of the work. And I've shot commercial photography for years. I used to shoot the Pottery Barn catalog and Design Within Reach, and I shot Michael Jordan for Hanes underwear and all kinds of stuff. And this work is the work that I'm the most proud of. It's the work that I'm most connected to. It's the work that means the most to me. So to have you guys ask me to do this really meant a lot, because it's not work I get paid a lot to do. It's not, it's not something that I really promoted or really put out there. And I just feel lucky to have been able to do it, and I'm really proud of it. So thank you very much.